So okay, along those lines though, you had an angle that you brought down on the list of topics here, Wicked, which is actually quite an interesting one. So there was a quote from Amazing here where it said, once your individual level is way above that of your teammates, it's about taking personal responsibility and trying to lift others up, figuring out solutions with them. If you can't do that, then you're not making it from a great player to an MVP type caliber player. Do you remember saying this, Amazing?
I do.
Right, so basically, this sounds like a very interesting topic here because it's also another one I've been trying to actually think about a lot in League of Legends. Like in the off-season, I made a video about this where basically I actually say that I think, basically the problem is, actually I'll give you a reference I did earlier. So, you know, like as I said last year, there was times in Mad Lions where Shadow did just look like the best jungler in LCS or LEC, looked fucking amazing. But actually when I look at him play overall, it's like, if you're the best, you can't just be the best of one champion. And then what beyond that? Like, beyond making amazing Lee Sin kicks, what did he do? And so my new way of describing it is, there's people who are really good today at a specific role in certain champions, right? There's one way you can specify it. But there's people who might not even be the best, like Smithy's a great counterbalance. I don't think he's been the best individual jungler for fucking half a decade or something. But you put him in a lot of scenarios in the game, he just knows how to win the game. Yeah, he just knows what to do. So basically, I do feel as though we need a distinction between like good players and then like whatever the extra quality that the other players, like the Perkses of the world, have. Because if you hear all the stories about them, it's not just their play. There's also elements about what they do that then like make someone else better, like you're saying. So set it up for us, enemies. Like, what are you thinking of when you say this? Like the distinction between like great player to MVP. So MVP for real has to impact the other players, not just like the best player.
So I think it's better to kind of give player examples. Like I think Alfari is a great player, but I don't think he's an MVP. Like, I think at least over the years that he has been in Europe, I think in NA may have been a bit different, the split, but I think over the years that he's been in Europe, he has been great, but he has not been an MVP. Individually, whatever he does on the lanes, like in terms of like winning his matchup, playing his matchup to perfection, like he's great at that. Like actually maybe like he may be top 2, top 3 in Europe in that, you know, like whatever number you want to put on him. But I do think when it comes to the team aspect, like understanding when he has to move, like when he has to play for other people's advantages, maybe gives up some of his, like he doesn't quite understand that part. He will maximize his opportunities, but will not be able to translate to the team success. And I do think over the years, we've seen a lot of players like that have been really specific, as you put it, right, really specifically good at their role. They've been insane at the role. Sunday is a good example in NA.
Yes.
I mean, Alfari is a good example in EU. I think Reckless over time was at certain point really that specific on the AD carry role.
Sure.
But even someone like, I think let's think of junglers. Let's say someone like, I mean, back in the days, Ku, Memento, even over a short period of time, right? Like these kind of players, like they were really good at the role, they're really good at the champs that they play, but they could never translate that to the team aspect because they didn't understand what it took to basically like the intangibles, what it's actually about, right? Like it could be, for example, on an individual level. Like for me as a jungler, it's obviously a bit easier. Like what was told to me in TSM, for example, was like, hey, try to make your teammates better. Like do certain things for your teammates in order to lift them up, right? So that meant like I could AFK from the whole game and basically like pull have kind of the media's play style to a certain extent that he had in season 3, and just look at it individually and have like insane stats every game, go 7-1, but my team could have the potential to lose. But what I could instead do is just like increase the chance of winning by simply ensuring steps that my team was actually well prepared. So I talk about what the enemy jungler is doing. I talk about what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the lanes individually, going to sacrifice 1 or 2 camps in order to make that play happen. For example, from a mid lane to get like 2 to 3 creeps above the enemy or like deny cannons, something like that. It's like, these are things you can't quite measure, but they're so important. They actually make a real difference between people that are winning constantly and people that are not winning constantly. Mythy is a good example of like a player that was not as good individually over season 6, 7, and 8, and 9 potentially. I mean, season 6 he was still top tier, but season 7, 8, 9 he became worse individually, but he was still winning. He was still like a top tier player, right? He was still making players better, right? So how do you measure that and how do you put that in perspective? And I think that's something you only notice and really know when you work with these people, right? Like, and there have been so many examples in other sports that I don't know why we're not basically making this applicable to esports as well, right? Or at least to League of Legends, because we have this already, like the discussion kind of in Counter-Strike partially, but we really don't have it in League of Legends where we talk about these intangibles, we talk about the shot calling aspect. We're trying to basically mechanicalize like the entire game, and that's just not how winning works. Like it's small sacrifices at certain times in order to get longer term like success. That's what it is in the end.
I completely agree with that. I actually have two examples myself of people I would consider MVPs, and one of them was never noticed, and the other one was pretty much noticed, right? So the first one I'll take is Froggen in season 2-ish, maybe season 3, something like that. He was really, really good, and the thing that was very important is when we were behind, it's so much harder to play the game, right? He often came up with like a small little strategy, like we can turn right now and then we can kill the entire enemy team, we can actually win this fight, or we can go hide in this bush over here, and then pray to God and hope it works, right? And these things gave us a good chance of actually coming back and winning games. We won a lot of games off those small little details. For example, one thing I remember is when you play Cassiopeia, he always had the perfect moments where we can turn right now. And then we turn and we win the fights, right? And we win the game of that. So I think that's a huge one where I'd like to give Frog a lot of credit. Then
by the way, I just love the way that like Wicked just completely butchered Cassiopeia there. Like, just whatever. It's legit. I like it. By the way, I don't know if you know this actually, but apparently when I say Aurelia, I've like you broke my brain on that Wicked like about 10 years ago, mate. Because apparently that's not how you're supposed to say the word, but like I'm stuck in your way of saying it now, mate. So it's too late. That ship sailed for me on that one. I'm fucked with that one. Well, what was the other example?
Other example who was never noticed in my opinion is Taps. Taps was the kind of guy that was super important for our team because he was the guy who went in and fought first and did a ton of damage, right? That we needed to get those team fights going. We needed the kind of forgiven Taps kind of player that goes in, does the damage, and makes us win the team fights. Even though he often looks stupid because he died early or he got caught or something, he was a very, very valuable member that we didn't have. And then once we got Reckless, the problem was we have two passive players now. Like Frog is somewhat the kind of player that's more passive, and then he sends you in like his little minion, and he watches you die while he does damage, right? And then Reckless is kind of the same, where we needed that one person who Taps was, who could be in with us and do the early damage so Frog could do his perfect play, which was really working nicely for us.
I mean, I can give you two obvious contrasts because there's a good one there. Like at the time, Reckless was a better player at AD carry than Tabs. But as you say, the role Tabs was playing actually turned out to be vital for that team. I'll give you another example because I'll use another EU example. When they swapped out, obviously it was technically different players in between. I think Mickey X was in between. But obviously Ignar at one point was the Misfit support, wasn't he? And then years later, they got Gorilla. Now on paper, if you're making a Hall of Fame, Ignar's never even going in the Hall of Fame. Gorilla would instantly be in the Hall of Fame. He has like a first ballot resume. But the point is, if in those teams, Ignar is like a fucking engaged support and Gorilla is a passive fucking Janna player, you better not try and put him in a team where you need an engaged support or you shout a lot. It doesn't matter if one is technically better. That's why I think the whole better angle doesn't work in that sense. Because like better in what way? You know what I mean? Like if I use a football example, because I know loads of Americans people who aren't from America rather, just get lost if I use NBA examples all the time. So I'll give people like a very quick example, in my opinion, of like the contrast here between being amazing at the role and being like potentially like the MVP of the whole team. I'll use like classic European midfielders, right? So one of the best British midfielders, at least when I used to watch soccer, was Frank Lampard, right? The Chelsea midfielder. And one of the things he was unusually good at was he used to score all the goals from midfield. So he would actually average like 20 goals a season as a midfielder. Now that sounds unreal, but in my opinion, if you contrast him with certain other midfielders who were scoring way less goals, I'll use an obvious one like Zidane, right? Zidane might score 6 goals. The difference is he'll also do like everything else in your team. Like, he'll set up this player, he'll hold the ball, he'll be like he'll go back on defense, he'll do all like a million things that don't show up on a stat sheet basically. So basically in that analogy, like Frank Lampard, I'm using the extreme example because he's obviously a brilliant player, but he's like the example of like Shadow on Lee Sin. He's just super epic at one thing, which isn't necessarily even everything about playing that role. Whereas in this case, we're talking about like, that would be like contrasting them with fucking Score or something, where they were in his prime and like every jungle path's perfect and he always knows which lane to help. Like that, I can see why it's hard for fans to understand this premise we're discussing here, because again, they're just going to think if you're the best player, surely you are the MVP. But I kind of agree. Like, there's definitely certain roles and players. Alfari's a pretty good shout, actually, I think, amazing. Because I always thought the same thing. I always thought, listen, if the game was only about laning, he might be the best to ever come from a U in that role. But the problem is the game is about so much more than just laning, let's be real.
No, it is. And there are a lot of other examples. And it's also just like, the more I think about it too, like the amount of players that we've gone through at certain times is that like we kind of like allow this narrative to kind of build up. And I think for some reason, ever since season 9, I think that's basically what franchising hit in EU, right? Like I feel like that discussion has been mechanicalized. And what I mean by that is like it's been focused on like how good is someone individually on his team, right? But you don't understand that's something people are now really discovering for some reason. Like 3 years after franchising, is that hey, you actually need someone that is leading the team. You actually need someone that's taking responsibility. You need someone that is like doing certain things that you, as a coach, for example, or as management, are not able to implement into the team. This could be someone that's keeping your morale up. This could be someone that keeps your shot calling going, right? But certain things like that are necessary and needed for a lot of teams, and you can't always just expect like 5 great like unless you obviously you have like Samson White from season 4, you have SKT from season 3, like unless you assemble like a super team like that, don't expect to have the highest amount of success unless you get veteran leadership and someone who's keeping morale and just the little things like within those situations, like in the team, because you will fall flat. Like you will fall flat because the example is not set, and the players will oftentimes lose their focus or lose certain things that they are supposed to have in these moments. And I think that's really undervalued these days. MVP type players are still really important, and this doesn't even mean that they have to be like MVPs individually. This just can also mean that it may be a role player that like Wicked talked about earlier, right? Like someone like Ocelot or Snoopy, maybe not quite like as Snoopy at certain times may have been a bit worse than you may want to, but he was still really good at the time, right? But there are other players that are not as individually like deficient, but they are still really good at their role, and they can give more to the team. And that's, for example, why I see Gilius. As dumb as it sounds, I really praise this guy oftentimes because I've seen him be this individualistic player, and over time he has actually evolved to someone that I can respect as a team player that will sacrifice himself in order to make the team better. So why don't you want to have that on your team? Like, because of Reddit narratives, because of popular narratives, why would you not want that on your team? And that's what I don't understand about these days in terms of esports, that like so many teams are arguing against success. Actually, in its essence, they're arguing against success because they're like, oh, we don't want that guy. He brought success, but he's not the best individual. Like, what kind of metric do you want to go like have people be judged by? Like, if someone consistently brings success, like, why the fuck would you not want him? Oh, because XYZ.
I also think it's really hard to measure, right? Because like I'll give another example. If you take Holy Phoenix, you guys all know him, he played MSI, and then you take Forgiven, right? These are players that play bot lane in a super aggressive way, and they're really good at playing the game if they have jungle pressure, if they have the team help, right? But they're not the greatest at playing the game if the jungler is ignoring them and just playing around top side, right? So if you have a team around them, you generally want to have a top laner that's good at playing weak side. It also depends what does the team need when you're playing the game, and what is the players good at that you already have.
Yes. Yeah, I actually think on the point you've just said there, Wicked, that's also another thing that kills me about the way like LEC teams are GMing. I won't name names for this one because I don't want to be mean to some rookies who are probably in a bad spot anyway. But you could probably guess some of the players I'm referring to if you watch the last LEC split. So one of the reasons why, it's like I said before, one of the reasons actually why I think like support and jungle are the most obvious role swap roles is because it's a way to keep someone who's really smart about the game, as you saw with the career of High. It's a way to keep them in the game even if they don't want to play a main laning role anymore. Meanwhile, I think those are the worst roles to bring rookies into who have only played, like, especially if they're true rookies, to distinguish from Wicked said. Like, obviously, it's different if they played 5 years of Challenger and loads of solo queue. And so, yeah, it's different. If they're a real rookie, though, like, another problem I have is this, right? I've seen players who played the ERLs, so I know why they got picked up. And in the ERL, what the team who was picking them up if LEC didn't think about was, in this team, they play around this, let's say, jungler, and he gets all his champions, and he fucking carries the game. You can't bring that guy into an LEC team unless you're going to build... listen, if he's self-made, do it. Build the whole team around him. But if you're going to bring him in to then be like a fucking Broxer-type jungler, like, your job is help the rest of the team. Just do what they say. Like, you've hired the wrong person for the job. Like, they've got the opposite skills to what you wanted. So in that case, if the case is like the Gilius example, that's what Gilius has done for the last... 2.5 years or something, basically ever since Vitality, for my money. He's just played his whole game around what like the mid laner needed or whatever, like in that scenario, that's not about who's good on this champion in solo queue, is it? It's about what can you do for our team. I agree.
I mean, even an example we talked about earlier was Breeper, right? I think Breeper is extremely talented, and he also showed that by going top 10, I think, in Korea, then went to Korea, right? But in a lot of their games, they don't do that well on Breeper because he doesn't get a lot of help from his teammates. He looks a lot worse than he is because he is made to look a lot worse, while the team is looking a lot better because they're playing around those and they're giving resources to the teammates, which is also a massive benefit, right? Because now, we can play around Breeper, but we don't have to play around Breeper. We can also play around the other members.
Actually, that,
Yes.
that whole thing is actually why some players are so overvalued and some players are so underrated. Like it's actually the resource allocation and the things that they're made to do in a team, right? Like, I mean, throughout the years we've had a lot of examples of that where people were just like shunned by the community because they're put in unfavorable spots. Like even SOAS to a certain extent in Season 9 Misfits, if I think about it, right? Like that team was it was badly built, but like he was made look a lot worse, and then you have the same in Immortals, right? Like Source, to my estimation, I don't know if he could still play at the top level, but if he didn't have those 2 years of like playing in teams that were misbuilt, he would probably still be a top tier player, right? Like why wouldn't he, right? He played in the World's Finals, or at least like had a team there, right? So like that doesn't make any sense, and the same applies for so many other players that are in that same vein where you put them in unfavorable spots and you suddenly expect them to be different. Like, I mean, I was a victim of that to a certain extent, even though I put myself in a situation with Schalke, right? Like, I put myself in a situation where I tried to, like, basically make the team better and sacrifice a lot of myself, but, then we didn't make it to Worlds or whatever it is, and then suddenly I get exchanged for someone that is mechanically better, right? But he doesn't have the same intangibles. What kind of thing are you telling the people, right? Then you're telling the people, we don't care about winning, we don't care about, like, your success. What we care about is, like, either we care about saving money, which is one thing, could be, or we care about like just like hoping for the best and like thinking that we're smarter than you, and that's probably the main thing. Actually, we're smarter than you. If we bring in a coach or whatever person we can have, we can unlock this guy and make this guy better than he ever was before. Dude, don't be lying to yourself. Just be honest and just say it. Like you don't have any fucking idea what you're doing at certain times, and that's what a lot of GMs should just be saying at this point. Like they keep arguing against success. And they're like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. We're just hoping for the best. Like that's what they're saying in a lot of the cases.
I agree with that. I also think a problem is there's no stability, right? Like every player, I feel like, especially NA, right, because of all the EU import, you're replaceable. We care about you. If you do one thing wrong or you look bad, we're replacing you. And I think it's bad because you don't have time to build anything up. You're not actually building something. It's understandable for me to change small things out, like just say, this player doesn't actually work with the team. We need somebody who's better at these skill sets. Then that makes sense to me. But right now, it just feels like people just join this team, deleted, removed, and it's completely random at times.
Yeah, I mean, especially for rookies. I don't know why Riot hasn't stepped in at this point. I think rookies should at least be signed for 2 years. I think at this point in time, if I think about it, like, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. But to just judge people by one split or even like by a couple of weeks, dude, please, man, like, please, like keep them on for 2 years. Be honest with them. And even if they don't end up on the bench, at least give them continuous chances to kind of reprove their value. But we see like players come and go after one split, 2 splits. What kind of message are we sending? Like, and that's like part of the issue with franchising too, right? Like that I've been criticizing all over again. That like you say it's a more stable environment, but honestly, it just gives the Orcs more power. To be fair, to be completely fair, it gives the Orcs more power to do whatever the fuck they want, right? If they don't want you anymore, they don't have to worry about relegations. They don't have to worry about it. If they don't want your paycheck, if they don't want to pay you anymore because you're being paid too much, well, next split they're gonna let you go, whatever it is, like, and that's basically what it is. So like, I mean, those are small things, but it's something that's been annoying me for quite a while.